What's good, everybody? I'm Jędrek, he's Sodek, and today we are gonna talk about answers and threads to some extent. Let's go. Alrighty, so this video actually evolved from another idea that Sodek had, because Sodek messaged me this weekend when we were brainstorming topics for the new video, and he said, well, dude, let's make a video about leyline binding because it's a very exciting and important card in Modern right now. And I'm like, yeah, that's a pretty cool idea, but it's also kind of small, just talking about one card. So we've decided to make this video about all sorts of different ways to interact, because I think it's a topic that is as evergreen as it gets, basically. Like, you always have some sort of way to interact with your opponent in Magic, and this video will be useful basically forever, or as long as Magic is around, I guess. So before we start, Sodek, do you have anything to add about how we came up with this idea, or anything else you want to share with our viewers?
Leyline Binding is a good card, and it's so good that even me, a dedicated combo player, showed the power of the card. So talking about removal altogether is a good way to celebrate printing of such a powerful card. Let's go.
All right. So first of all, and I guess this is the most important thing to touch upon, is how should you even balance threats and answers? Because for the first, I guess, half of Magic history, or close to a half, threats were very bad compared to answers. Like, you were killing hill giants with swords to plowshares, or you were casting counterspell on things like even like a good threat. Like, if you think about good threats from like early 2000s, not even talking about like Serra Angel and stuff, but good threats from early 2000s, like, people were excited about playing with cards like Morphling or Psychotog, which are not great, like by nowadays standard by any means. So at some point something clicked, and WotC decided, hey, let's print more good threats and less good answers. I think the break point comes somewhere close to like M10, these kind of sets. Like, Planeswalker started to appear at that time in Lorwyn. So we started seeing first really strong Planeswalkers like Jace, the Mind Sculptor, or even Planeswalkers that weren't nearly as good as Jace, but still very strong. Things like Gideon Yura, or Elspeth Knight Errant, or Garruk Wildspeaker. Like, those cards were actually pretty potent in their respective standard formats, or even like extended. So also at that time, WotC decided to do things like, well, we won't print 4-mana Wrath of Gods anymore, or sweepers of this sort. And they only recently came back to it after like 5 or 6 years of not printing 4-mana sweepers. Or we won't print Mana Leak in standard, or Lightning Bolt in standard. And we entered this new era of threats being, and also like at the same time, threats started to be much, much better. Like, I think the height of it is like Battle for Zendikar, this type of Magic when Band Company was a good deck, and basically your whole deck was like creatures that can't trip or do something else, and the best way to deal with your opponent is by doing like, everything was Shriekmaw or a Muldrifter, so you just wanted to play Shriekmaws and Muldrifters to counteract their Shriekmaws and Muldrifters.
Yeah, and like better Muldrifters. Like, when I remember Tireless Tracker doing its thing,
yeah,
Tireless, yes, disgusting. Yeah,
I think Tireless Tracker is exactly so like the best like it's the poster child of this era of design. Like Tireless Tracker was insane. Like it was so good it was played in modern and people were actually like okay with playing it in modern, like pre-modern Horizons 1. So definitely a complete switch off design principles from early Magic. And some people will tell you, oh, I liked how it was beforehand when you just were drawing all the cards and either you were killing people in one turn combos with, I don't know, Stroke of Genius or whatever, or you killed all their lands with some recurring way to kill their lands and then win with single Serra Angel or whatever. So really, like both of the extremes, like extremes are almost always terrible in anything in life. Extremes are just quite bad. Like if it's too cold, you will literally die. If it's too hot, you will die as well. So like in everything, and Magic is the same. So like for example, what happens if answers are way too strong when they are much stronger than the threats? So like I don't expect many people watching these videos to play Magic like that they were playing Magic in early 2000s. I wasn't myself as well, like at least not a competitive side of Magic. But some more recent example, which is my favorite one in those discussions always, it's Pauper like 5 years ago, when people were playing like Mystical Teachings deck, and there was like basically blue-black control and this weird style of like ephemerate blink decks, and it was basically whoever draw more thing twice win. This type of play, which was kinda insane, and I hated it. And you were decking very often. You were going. You were basically, when you played the mirror of this type of deck of like blue-black control and Pauper on modal, you were clicking like a madman since minute one because you knew that it will come to time most likely. So I guess Sodek, this seems like the worst type of Magic for you, I guess. Like it seems utterly terrible. What do you think about it?
Generally speaking, I like attacking more than reacting, and in my opinion, it's just like I like to execute my game plan and do my things, and not wait until my opponent answers everything. So I liked much better the times when I could, for example, grape shot someone in Papa. It was much more interesting, and all these decks that like the best deck in the format, maybe not the best, but I remember this blue red deck that had a win on like creating two free Minotaurs.
Flurry of
Something like
Horns.
Yeah, that
It's 5 mana sorcery, create two free Minotaur tokens with haste. And these days we even have a better card because there is a card from Strixhaven for 4 mana blue sorcery that creates a serpent that's power and toughness is equal to number of, like it's not dynamic, it's static once you cast it, but it's XX with X being the number of instants and sorceries in your graveyard. So like you create a 10-10 or a 15-15 or whatever. So I loved that deck. This deck was so good. It actually killed your opponent also. Like it was like, I don't think it's the most like I only play answers deck that was in Pauper. It played 0 creatures, that's true, but also it had like bolts and other type of like things you can cast at your opponent's face, some sort of like direct damage. So that deck I think was that deck was all right. It wasn't like blue-black teachings.
Okay, good to know. If I have to choose the spectrum, I liked much more the formats that when threats were much more powerful than answers, because at least you could have your own threads that could dictate the pace of the game. Although there are the big problems with it when like the play draw difference mattered a bit too much, in my opinion.
Yes, that's an excellent point, I think. Like, this is one of my biggest pet peeves in Magic in general, when threats are too powerful, the die roll is too important, basically. Like, for example, my another favorite format to mention in those conversations is the standard right after Kaladesh released. After Pro Tour Kaladesh,
maybe Pro Tour
people...
Iter Revolt, it would be a better example.
No, Pro Tour Kaladesh is fine. Because at Pro Tour Kaladesh, people discovered spirits. Like, not many, or Blue-White Flash rather. Not many people played Blue-White Flash at this Pro Tour, but it had really good result. And in the next coming months, I remember that I played at the GP in Warsaw or Kraków. I think it was Warsaw. And then I played GP Madrid as well, both in standard. And Blue-White Flash was one of the best decks in those tournaments. And when Blue-White Flash curved out on the play, there was nothing in the format that could have stopped that deck. Because if you went turn 1 Inspector, turn 2 Copter, turn 3 Reflector Major Queller, turn 4 Gideon, Ally of Zendikar, like, you couldn't match that in the mirror because, well, you are playing same cards, but you are on the draw, and especially cards like Spell Queller are just ridiculously good when you are ahead. Like, you go Inspector, Copter, they go Inspector, Copter, and then, like, I guess in this situation you can trade Copters, but still, like, you can just not attack, and when they play their thing, you can do like your Queller thing, but still, like, those draws like snowballed so goddamn hard, and there was like, you literally did not have a decent 1 mana removal spell or decent 2 mana counter spell, and like, I really tried to play like some sort of control-ish decks then, and they were miserable. They were so bad.
I remember like players were trying then Revolutionary Rebuff. It was a counter for 2 mana that counters unless someone pays 2, and it
no. It counters a non-artifact spells.
Okay.
So you couldn't counter, for example, Smuggler's Copter, which was one of the best cards in the format. Like, why would
Marvel?
You? Or Etherworks Marvel.
Yeah.
So, like,
I love this deck. It was cool.
So, yeah. And this is obviously the extreme example of this kind of format, but there were always also formats in which the mismatch between threats and answers, like what can they target, led to proactive decks being so much more powerful. Like, we'll talk about it at length later on, but a good example would be modern pre-fatal push. When you like had a bolt versus an X4 and stuff like that. Okay. As I said, we will talk about it later on. Now let's jump to the main part of this video, and to some extent, our answer to the question we posed, which is how threats and answers should be balanced. And we sought help in game theory, which is an aspect of math, as some of you probably know, yada, yada, yada. So basically, we've made not even a graph, a table, I guess, that you will see on screen at some point during the next 2 minutes. I'll add it in post-prod, so I don't know how I will match it up just yet, in which you have presented 4 scenarios. You have 2 players, a player with a threat and a player with an answer. And there are 4 possible scenarios. Like, both of you have your thing, so a threat player have a threat and an answer player have an answer. You both have none of those, so there is neither a threat that needs to be answered nor the answer for this threat. A one-side mismatch, so there's a threat without an answer on the other side, and the second side mismatch, which is an answer without a threat. And if you think about it, in a situation when nobody has a card that matters, so there's no threat and no answer, so 0-0 situation basically, we have a draw, like nothing happens, like the game continues. Like, of course, there are some implications, like for example, the answer deck usually have some top end like planeswalkers and stuff, so just passing the turn is good for the answers deck, but on the very base level, like nothing happens because there is nothing to kill and nothing to be killed with. Then the situation in which there is no threat but an answer in hand usually also results in nothing because you have an answer that can't be cast without a target. And one of the things that WotC did to push answers in like modern design is to have more modal spells, because modal spells can be used. Like for example, you are playing a blue deck in modern and have Archmage's Charm. You don't have anything to counter. Sure, I will just draw 2 cards and like further my game plan, which is one of the reasons that Archmage's Charm is such an excellent card. And then there is a mismatch in the other direction, which is you have a threat, but there is no answer for it. And this is also not like a binary outcome. It's not always the same degree of failure, I guess, for the player who is supposed to answer. For example, if you are playing against Belcher and they cast Belcher with 3 mana, if you don't have answer at the spot on the spot, and it basically has to be like a counter spell or a Son of Silence or whatever, you just die and the game is over and there is nothing you can do. And the other extremity of the situation is, for example, what was one of the part of why Popper was so abysmal, that even if you had a threat, your threat was a 2-powered creature that had to attack 10 times. And you gave your opponent 10 turns to find those answers. So the amount of snowballing in threats or just immediate urge to answer them is also a very important factor. And then finally, we have a situation in which both players had their cards. And I would argue that answers should be designed in such a way that answering the card with an answer that's supposed to answer it should be profitable for a person answering it. Because if there is no answer, then the situation is worse for those person. Like if you just have it as a wash, for example, if all answers were I have Ragavan and you have Lightning Bolt, so you trade 1 card and 1 mana for 1 card and 1 mana, then threats are too strong. Like you don't want answers to just be neutral on mana and cards at all times, because then answers are too weak. But you also don't want them too strong, of course. Any opinions on that, Sodek? Do you agree with what I said, or do you have your own point?
I basically agree with most of it. The trick is how, like, if you have this Ragavan versus Lightning Bolt situation, like the player with removal can never win the situation, because like at best it can be a draw. But the other problem is, how do you want to make it up? Like there's not that much room to create an environment when a removal player can gain an advantage because of like the nature of playing a removal spells, because you always need to react to what the opponent does, and the opponent dictates the pace of the game, basically.
Yes, that's why you could argue that, for example, it was a good thing when one of the most played creatures in Modern was Tarmogoyf, and it cost 2 mana. And then they printed Fatal Push, and you were trading 1 mana for 2 mana. And you were ahead on tempo. So you could, like, your opponent played Tarmogoyf, and then you could Fatal Push, and then still hold up a 2 mana spell, for example, if you're on the play. Or if a creature is not as immediate threat as Ragavan is. Like Ragavan hits you once or twice, you are dead. And some people will tell you, no, it's not always the case, but it's usually the case. Like if you connect with Ragavan twice, it's quite hard to lose usually, unless your situation is like abysmal and otherwise.
Or unless your Ragavan deck is shitty, because people tend to play bad decks with Ragavan and strongly rely on connecting with it. So
Yes.
so if your deck is bad and you like keep hitting with Ragavan, but it like doesn't give you what you wanted, maybe it's not a good Ragavan deck. For instance, I saw like an experiment when Belcher players were trying Ragavan. It was a really bad Ragavan deck if you think about it, because it was really
It's not hard to think about that, really.
It's a like the idea is to like get treasures, like to have a really good mana dork, but without any support. Like this Ragavan could also quite often do nothing. So if you have problems with doing something with your treasures and like maybe stolen cards, maybe change the deck.
Yes, but also like a contrary argument to Ragavan. Like if you have a creature that can be allowed to stay on board for like a couple of turns. Like for example, back in the day, when we were playing against some kind of zoo deck, if Wild Nakatl hit you twice, and then you killed with Lightning Helix, you were okay with that. Definitely not the same way as you are with Ragavan now. Or for example, these days, if Channeler hits you twice, it's sometimes you will be bolted out of the game, especially if you took too much damage from your own mana. But more often than not, it will be okay to kill this Channeler after it attacked a couple of times, especially since it sometimes attacks us for one.
Yeah, or maybe you can happily trade your like damage the opponent deals you for more control of the game. You don't have to tap out for immediate removal
Exactly.
spells. So you can
yes.
keep counter spell and Archmage Charm all the time.
Yes,
so it's not as risky.
Or something like, for example, you're playing against Yawgmoth and they played Strangler Geist on 2 and they attacked with it like 2 or 3 times, and you are happy to take 4 or 6 damage and then Prismatic Ending to get a clean 1/1 while holding up counterspell for Yawgmoth or Grizz the whole time. So yeah, definitely it's very non-binary in a sense that there is always a spectrum on how much you need to answer it immediately and how much you are ahead on. So for example, some extreme examples, like I don't know, if you're seeing every single removal spell cantrips, that's way too good. So like it's like, for example, we are bouncing a token with Teferi Time Raveler, or back in the day you were electrolyzing an X2. Like this was something you were actively happy about because you were getting card and like you cryptic command something with a counter draw modes. So like you don't want every single answer to cantrip because it's way too good. So you have to create value in some other ways. And what Sodek very accurately voiced at the beginning of this section was that it's hard to get that kind of trade against Ragavan. And that's why Ragavan is such a powerhouse, basically. Like it might be too strong. Like some people will tell you, oh, Ragavan needs to go. I don't know if Ragavan needs to go, but it's definitely like, if you think about it, like for example, there is a next, imagine there is a Modern Horizons free set, and if you want to shake up Modern the same way that MH1 and MH2 did, how do you shake up Ragavan format? Like what do you do to make a deck that's 1 mana 1/1? Like your deck is threats and answers that cost 1 or maybe 2 mana. Like how do you want to combat it without in the same like card for card and being up on mana axis? You basically can't design too much free interaction, because free interaction kind of sucks, especially if the free interaction is so catch-all as Solitude is, for example. Like Solitude invalidates a lot of cool things because
the problem with free interaction is that like back in the day, free interaction was attached to really bad cards. For instance, Force of Will. It was a like 5 mana counter spell, which was and which was quite bad. And the other option was to exile 1 card and lose 1 life, so you can counter something for 0. Still,
Okay.
countering something for 0 is great.
I
But
have
let's compare this to Force of Vigor that can create 2. Like
yes.
you use 2 cards to destroy 2 things, but the opponent most likely paid mana for 2 of those things, and you don't pay for Force of Vigor. Or you destroy a land in the form of Urza's Saga. So
Okay. What do you think about this card? It costs 0 mana. Or it costs 1 red. And then it costs 1 red less if you control a mountain. So that you can't play it in like a blue-white deck or whatever. And it deals 2 damage to any target. It's a 0 mana shock if you control a mountain.
0 mana shock.
It's a 0 mana shock. Do you think it's too strong? I don't think so. Like, I don't think Bern would play it just to have 0 mana spells, because 2 mana for 1 card is just such a bad rate. But it's a way to kill an early creature for like.
Bern wouldn't play this, but I think that like most control decks will be happy playing it.
Like, there are so many creatures it can't kill, right?
Yeah, like the idea is to opponent plays Ragavan, and now instead of playing your removal, you can play Ragavan and play your free shock, killing opponent's Ragavan.
Yes, and I think that's good.
Risky, I would say risky.
I also like that it's a way to answer one of my most hated cards, which is how is it called? Esper Sentinel.
Okay.
Because Sentinel is fucking sucks, man. Like, what the fuck?
It's a powerful card. Eh?
The only thing worse than Sentinel is 2 Sentinels, man. Like, that's so fucking terrible. Okay. So moving onwards to the next point on our list. We already touched on that, which is answers that have other purposes are much better than the answers that are like Doomblade. If your opponent has no creatures, is a dead card. I don't know, Archmage's Charm, if your opponent has no spells, can draw you 2 cards. Or some other modal things, like most charms, most commands are things that can do a bunch of different things, which is really, really cool. And I like how they tried to push the power level of answers in this way. So
I think the most important part of this section is that answers are time sensitive. They need to wait for the opponent's threat to shine, but like we said, like when there's a threat versus answer battle, if the opponent doesn't have the threat, you will never get ahead with your answer unless it gets some other applications. That's why, like that's the solution Wizards gave us to balance this situation of like from the game theory when the player with threat has an advantage. So
yes,
generally speaking, I like the concept, but I also like the fact that all these modal cards are kind of overcosted. Maybe
yes, they're
the
like
exception of
half a mana. They're like half a mana too expensive. That's cool.
Yeah, or like Archmage's Charm is like all of its modes are really good, but on the other hand, the casting cost, like triple blue,
is very severe. That's true.
It's much harder to get than Collagen's command.
Yeah, like imagine that you can play Archmage's Charm in a creativity deck. Like, it would be so bonkers. Like, if this card got like 2 and a blue or something like that. Also, I think that because of what you mentioned, which is time sensitivity of answers, like counter magic is particularly time sensitive because you have a singular window of opportunity. You have the moment the card is on the stack, and after it's gone from the stack, your counter spell can't work on it. And if you have a removal spell, you have this continuous window. That's not a point, but a like period of time. So basically from whenever this creature entered to whenever the game ends or this creature leaves, you have the answer to, you can do it on your turn, or their turn, next turn. So that's why I think that designing modal counterspells is even more important than designing nice modal answers in general. And
we got a few. Like Archmage Charm is the most obvious one, but we also have Drown the Lock.
yes, or Is It Charm even from the bit of old times. Like Is It Charm was a reasonable card for years in different format. It's not anymore, but it was.
Yeah, at its time, like it was a good card.
It was a good card in standard, I think.
Or like this modal section was the main reason was because it's no longer is a thing. Most likely why Cryptic Command was so good, because there was always something to do with it. So even if the counter spell was really overcosted, like 4 mana compared to like 2 for the mana league, for instance, the reward was always there.
100%. And we are talking about this, like, let's call it modern design of answers. And what is also really important, in my opinion, and quite often neglected, is how versatile answers are these days. Like the most apparent part of it to me is that back in the day, main deck artifacts and enchantments basically had hexproof. Like, because there were no cards in the main decks that, aside from like Abrupt Decay, that could have killed, like, I don't know, you're playing Storm against Blue-White Control and you played Pyromancer Ascension on 2 and you were sure that bearing like a Cryptic Command bounce, this Pyromancer Ascension will stick on the battlefield for the whole game. It was basically one of the parts of why Birthing Pod was so insane, because there were no cards that can remove Birthing Pod game 1, because there were no cards like a Braid, no Colagan's Command, no Assassin's Trophy, none of that. Like, you just couldn't kill Birthing Pod once it resolved, and you couldn't take it with Inquisition of Kozilek because it costed 4 fucking mana.
And Abrupt Decay.
And Abrupt Decay, which was basically the only playable like broad answer at the time, because it was like Singleton Maelstrom pull from time to time. Like, come on. Definitely, I've had my fair share of mostly standard formats, but at some point modern as well, when your deck was basically a bunch of Essence Scatters and Doomblades, or similar cards that aren't as versatile, and you were running into this wrong half problem that, for example, non-blue mid-range decks very often have. Like, your junk deck draws all removal against combo or all discard against an aggro deck. All your Thoughtseize, to be more precise even. So like, you don't have that anymore really, because instead of Essence Scatters and Doomblades, you have Counterspell and Prismatic Ending, which can either counter any spell that can be countered, or it can deal with basically any threat. Like, it costs a bunch of mana, but you can do that. And you are never at mana disadvantage. Or like, you are very rarely at mana disadvantage, I guess. Because sometimes you will, but once again, not common.
I remember times when playing combo had, really high upside of winning game 1 because you were doing something that like opponent couldn't do that much. Like, I was playing Ad Nauseam for a long time, and like Pyrexan Alive was like outside the Jant matchup, like it was guaranteed to stay in the battlefield, because Jant had Abrupt Decay and that's it, like 2 or 3 copies. And nowadays, most of white cards can do things like March of Otherworldly Light, Prismatic Ending. These
exactly
cards that like have changed the idea of playing combo, because nowadays your combo needs to have like extremely powerful upside. For instance, Underworld Breach combo deck is in my opinion a good example, because you can win out of nowhere and you
can win at one turn basically.
Yeah,
you can ignore Prismatic Ending largely in your like combo side of the deck, which you couldn't do with Unlife, because it costed like 10 mana or whatever, or even more. 8 plus
Nauseam,
11 whatever.
So like with Simian Spirit Guide.
I guess you had.
It was
guide.
possible, but nowadays, no.
Yeah. So yeah, and I guess the last thing I wanted to mention in this part about answers being more versatile is the shift from things that like 3 or 4 years ago would only target a creature and now can target creature or planeswalker. Like there is a card from the new set, Fires of Victory, that sees some Pioneer play and it can target planeswalkers. And before this video started, I talked about it to Sodek, and Sodek was like, what the fuck, this card can target planeswalkers? Or like, you know, there are cards like Strangle or Flameless Bolt. And back in the day, you had like Fiery Impulse. And that makes planeswalkers much less like invulnerable, because back in the day, like I think the most extreme example of it was to me when Skyclave Apparition was printed and Uro was banned. So it was the prowess Heliod metagame, and I've had a good amount of success playing Esper Control in Modern then. And when I played with Teferi Hero of Dominaria, it felt like it had hexproof, because the most common answer to... There was no Unholy Heat. The most common answer to permanents were the Skyclave Apparitions, and a 5 mana permanent that also had 5 loyalty, and it could defend itself with this 2 mana you get from the untap. Like, it felt like this card can never die. With like compared to now, where you cast it and your opponent has LOL, I have Unholy Heat. So yeah,
I think that Unholy Heat was the biggest. Like, remember the Fatal Push era? Like Unholy Heat is the just the new era of
100% agreed.
And
yeah, and I think Unholy Heat is too strong. I think Unholy Heat has too much effect.
Yeah, like 6 damage is a lot. If it was 5, it would be, in my opinion, still really good and so on. But like, imagine like Primeval Titan being a threat. Like, it was a threat basically all the time in Modern, and nowadays Amulet is still playable and it's a reasonable deck. But the idea that your 6-drop can be killed so easily with a 1-drop like commonly played removal spell, because it's it's like Path to Exile is no longer a premier removal spell, like, because Unholy Heat is just better most of the time.
Yeah, but basically what I would like it to be, I would like Unholy Heat to deal 4 damage, and I would like every planeswalker that costs 3 or less mana to plus to 4. Basically, so there's this clear part when your planeswalkers that are 4 or more mana can plus to 5. Like, it would require the tremendous amount of planning throughout the years and designing cards in like 5 years ago with, okay, so in 5 years we'll print Unholy Heat and yada yada yada. But basically, like, you can plus things like Chandra, Torch of Defiance, or Jace, or Teferi to more than 4 counters. But if you play Liliana of the Veil and you plus, it has 4, bam, Unholy Heat. You play Renan 6 and pluses, 4, bam, Unholy Heat. But yeah, basically the only thing is Teferi, like Teferi pluses to 5. If Teferi plus to 4, so for example, it starts with 3 minus 2 plus 1, or something like that, and then you have this nice like barrier, basically, this nice breakpoint of, if your planeswalker costs 3 or more, less mana, you can answer it with Unholy Heat no matter what, turn after it enters. And if your planeswalker is more expensive, so you had to take your time and like spend a lot of mana on it, then okay, you can't kill it clean with Unholy Heat. I think that would be really cool. And the similar point about like Primeval Titan that you mentioned already, that it's not really cool that you can kill a 6-drop with a 1 mana spell so easily. Like 1 mana spell, no downside. Like, there is some downside against like a bunch of endurances and Bujuka box, I guess, but still, like, yeah, I think ending is a bit too strong and a bit too warping, I guess. Like, it's kind of a furious situation of being victim of its own success to some extent. Like Heat might seem a bit worse because less people play things like Primeval Titan, because Heat is too strong. Yeah, and I think that's not ideal.
Yeah, but on the other hand, like, I personally really like the current Modern format, and I feel that, like, we are in a position when the balance between like threats and answers is okay. The only problem for me is that there are like not a lot of threats at the level at the same level. Like there are a few threads that are much better than everything else, and it's
So
really hard to print other really good threads
so
that
yeah.
can
So what threads
do
do you have
things.
in mind when when you talk about those threads that are way above everything else?
Ragavan.
And you said threads plural, so I
Yeah,
assume you
like
had
Ledger
more than one.
Shader maybe.
No, I
That's
think
the thing.
I think Ragavan and Ren and 6 are head and shoulders above everything else, kinda.
Yeah, kinda.
Like I
Like
think
I was also thinking about like Turn 1 Fury, but that's probably too ambitious, yeah.
no,
Because
like if you actually have a turn one Fury, you had to play the red
spend
black deck,
3 cards.
and
Yeah.
like you have to spend a lot. That's a lot of investment. That's something you should be able to do, I think. But yeah,
Yeah.
I second the opinion of Modern being pretty cool right now, and we basically have those first world problems, right? Like
Yeah.
nothing is on fire in Modern. The format is good, even if some people will say that it's not. I don't agree with them, and my biggest problem with Modern right now is yes. I think Ragavan and Renexis are a bit too good on the play, and that's my biggest complaint with Modern. And I think it's a pretty decent complaint overall to have as your biggest complaint. But yeah, and I am fairly curious to see how Modern develops because we've had a showcase this weekend, and for the first time in forever, basically, we had 0 Merctides in top 32. We had 6 Merctides in top 32 of the challenge next day, 2 of which top 8'd, but still, like, Merctide was nowhere to be seen in the showcase. I don't remember how many Merctides actually showed up on top tables in Paris this weekend. I know that it overall win rate was pretty bad.
Yeah, like 40,
and I know that, for example, 47, I think, but still.
I think it was lower even.
You can check on Discord because I don't want to open Discord because then your face will disappear from the screen.
What? Okay. I don't think that's so important. Like,
yeah, it's on our Discord basically, so if you can check it, like, okay, like what was actually the most troubling for Merctide, in my opinion, in those results was that it was under 50% against others, which is famously the category of decks like random nonsense, more or less, against which Merctide should be really good. Like this is a deck to prey upon those, like I play my janky combo or my not super efficient deck, and you are playing Ragavan into counterspell, and I die. Like this is how it usually looked. And now Merctide being less than 50% against others, like this means that format at large and this random nonsense at large had to adapt to Merctide being Merctide. And they came up, like separately, every deck by itself, came up with a solution of, or at least some of those decks came up with a solution on how to beat Merctide, which is
like, most likely lightning binding because that's
yes.
new hotness. On the other hand, I saw the results of for example Rhinos, and it was really interesting because Rhinos had a bad matchup versus most of the played like top decks. It had like 40% matchup versus OMG for color and some
But
other decks. But
did you check for color rhinos or free color rhinos?
Oh, that's too problematic.
Because I remember that the disparity in win percentage was also tremendous. Like for free color, like Timur classic rhinos had like 47% win rate, and 4 color rhinos with Yorion or without had 60% win rate. So like
yeah, and these 4 color rhinos had like 65% versus others, and it was what like Murktide always have been.
Well,
and
I guess for basically since rhinos became a deck, we are like beating this to oblivion. Like basically we are saying every single time, icing your land into 10 power is really good against nonsense, and it still is.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So
Okay. Anything you want to add? Because I think we talked about everything we wanted to talk.
Okay, maybe the last thing is that the essence of this, after you watching this video, what our viewers should remember after it, because we have this the golden idea about the combo section, and now what was your golden idea?
Okay, so basically I think that answers should be slightly better than threats, and that's my one sentence summation of this video.
And speaking of the reality we are in my opinion, if you are, for instance, building your new deck or trying to tune the deck that's already existing, just think about playing the best possible removal and creating the right environment for this removal to shine. For instance, if you decide to play lane binding, make sure that your mana can handle it, because that's the biggest problem with the card. The card by itself is a better source to plowshares, most likely, as long as you can cast it for 1 mana. Okay, it's not an exile. It's you can still get the card if you
even the fact that you can't cast it for 1 mana on turn 1, I don't think that card is better than Swords to Plowshares by any means.
On the other hand, you can deal with any permanent,
but it's a much better Abrupt Decay, basically. I would akin it more to Abrupt Decay, this type of card. Maybe. Or Assassin's Trophy.
I think it's a Assassin's Trophy is much worse. It's not
yes, I think so as well. But it's more of a category of cards that I think most people I think this card will be mostly cast for 2 mana. Of course, it will be cast for 1 mana a fair amount of time, but I think try them into Shockland, cast it for 2, or try them into Basic, even cast it for 2. It will be a pretty common play pattern for it.
Yeah, I also see many decks can try to go Triumph into another Triumph casting for 1 mana on turn 2, which is cool because maybe it's the same as casting this for 2 mana on turn 2, but all your future lane bindings will also cost 1. So
yes, of course.
So this setup can be really good. Overall, I'm pretty hyped about the power level of lane binding, and if you are not scared to play, greedy mana bases, I strongly suggest you to try the card and try the strategy involving the card.
Yes. Okay. So that's it for us today. Remember, answers should be better than threats. And I guess modal answers are cool. Is another important point I wanted to make. Modal cards are in general really cool. So please, WotC, I am Duke. If you are watching this video for some reason, please print more modal cards because I love them. That's all we had for you today. Thanks so much for watching as always. All of our links are as always in the description. Website, Twitter, Twitch, yada, yada, yada. We'll see you next week. And until then, take care and bye-bye.
See ya.